From a network of highly secure, top secret locations across South Texas, this is a bonus ad hoc edition of the Spurs Insider podcast, hastily assembled in the aftermath of a significant transaction for your local Cagers. Dejounte Murray, the best player on the San Antonio Spurs last year, probably was going to be the best player on your San Antonio Spurs next year, is no longer a San Antonio Spur. We will get into all of that over the next several minutes, probably. I'm your host, as always, Mike Finger, joined by the usual panel of Express News beat writers, Jeff McDonald and Tom Orsborn, and sports editor Nick Talbot. And the listeners can't say they didn't see this coming. We mentioned on the last podcast we did that this, at least the host mentioned, that this was probably going to happen before next season, if not before the end of the week. It did happen. I guess I'll just open it up with to the floor. What are your reactions to this news? Let's start with Jeff.
Well, if you talk to and hear from Spurs fans yesterday, I really heard three very distinct, separate reactions, diametrically opposed in some ways. The first one is, how on earth could you give up on a 25-year-old all-star still in his prime? Isn't that the point of a rebuilding project, is to find 25-year-old all-stars still in their prime? What are the Spurs doing? Number two would be the opposite. Like, what a haul for Dejounte Murray, 3 first-round picks.
And that's
that's a superstar kind of haul for a guy that wasn't yet a superstar. And the third is, why didn't the Spurs do this several years ago when they had to trade Kawhi Leonard and start this rebuilding process earlier? Like, what took them so long? And I'm here to tell you, all three of those people are right. Like, they all have a point.
If you came here looking for the hot take, like you said, praising this for being brilliant or ripping it for being asinine, you're probably not going to get either. I won't speak for Tom and Nick, but it's just kind of, and we've mentioned this going back to the Kawhi days, it's just kind of complicated, and in a way it's sad, because Dejounte Murray was a huge accomplishment, a triumph of just about every part of the organization, from scouting to development to coaching to, the players who played with him all took pride in what Dejounte Murray became. And to have it in this way, whether you're a fan, whether you're a member of the organization, just somebody who's watching, it's sort of sad to know that that's how it had to end. But like I said, it's nuanced, it's complicated. Tom and Nick, you guys can weigh in too.
It's not personal, Sonny. It's business, as
right.
Michael Corleone said. No, I think the only criticism is coming from people that are emotionally invested, which fans should be. But they're swinging for the fences. They want to get that centerpiece franchise player next year. Rather than continue to just spin their wheels and be challenging for a play-in year after year. Logically, it makes sense. Mike Finger, you had a compelling argument today in your column. And
what?
Yeah, I don't.
It is about time.
I can't fault him for this. And yeah, I like Dejounte, and what a great story. I mean, seeing him develop, knowing where he came from in Seattle, overcoming the knee injury. We didn't write about this much until I talked to him a bit about it at the All-Star break. But his sister dying tragically last off season, and he was able to put that, somehow put that behind him. I don't want to say behind him, but just compartmentalize it and still become an all-star. So there's so much to like about him. He gave us great scouting reports from his film study. And I say that in jest, but
he watches a lot of basketball.
He watches a lot of basketball, and he was always willing to share with us what he picked up from that. But No, it's what sports is. It's what pro sports is, and it's tough. It sucks. It hurts, but it's the right move.
I think when you generally look at the big picture, it's the right move. Just saw reporting today, Brian Windhorst from ESPN saying that the Dejounte Murray was unlikely to extend with the Spurs. So a lot of it comes down to contracts. Whether that he's right on that or not is, a question. But
an important part about that, and I didn't want to mention other people's reporting, but important part about that is he mentioned an extension next year, and that's correct that he didn't want to do that because that would have been a dumb move for him. He would get more money by signing the new contract 2 years from now. So Brian Windhorst is correct that Murray didn't want to sign an extension next offseason, but that's not breaking news. That's not really important here. I don't want to I like Wendy. I don't want to dismiss that out of hand. It's just not that wasn't a big deal. The play always was going to be for him to sign a new deal in 2 years.
To clarify, what I understood from the Wendy reporting was he wasn't saying Dejounte was only going to play 2 more years for the Spurs and then was refusing to play beyond that.
Right.
He was
correct.
refusing to. It was a non-starter because that's based off your current salary, the extension.
Correct.
So
correct.
that what's he made 16 last year? I think he can get 120% of that, as opposed to 2 years from now, a new deal you can start at 40 million. That's a 8-figure difference.
It's really an important distinction to make because again, when I started getting these comments from fans about how there's reporting that Murray said he wasn't coming back, told him he wasn't coming back. That's not actually what Windhorst said. He said he wasn't going to extend next year. That he did not say that Murray said he wasn't going to play beyond the 2 years, like Jeff said. And I guess it's good that this came up because it's important to make these distinctions. And in writing about the salary cap and writing about contracts and just reporting the NBA in general, there's so many instances of this where one thing that begins as accurate gets turned into something. People have reactions to it that aren't quite accurate. And I just think, again, this is a complicated story in a lot of ways. And it should be noted that as long as we're talking about other, national media sources, it's perfectly reasonable for smart people to disagree about this trade, to extremes. Kevin Pelton and Zach Harper know a lot about basketball. They are personnel analytic type guys for ESPN and for The Athletic. And they both wrote grades, which can be kind of silly, but fans love them. Raiders love them. Might as well do them. They both did grade posts on this trade yesterday. ESPN, Kevin Pelton gave your San Antonio Spurs an A for this deal. And the Atlanta Hawks, I don't want to, I think it was either a C or a D.
It was a C.
It was a clear-cut winner for the San Antonio Spurs. Zach Harper of the Athletic called it a heist for Atlanta, gave them an A+, and the Spurs a D-. And neither of these people are idiots. It's reasonable people can disagree, and we don't know now who's going to win. We don't know who made the right move, but I think that just illustrates that both sides had reasonable rationales for doing what they did.
To make a Star Wars reference, from a certain point of view, as Obi-Wan said, both are right. Just because there's still a lot of unknowns in this deal. You don't know how the Spurs are going to do going forward. You don't know what pick they're going to get. You don't know what these Hawks picks are going to turn into. One of them is 5 years down the road, and the Hawks could be really good, or Dejounte and Trae Young could be not a very good pairing, and it could not work. And Trae Young could ask out. I mean, that happens all the time. 5 years from now, we don't know where the Hawks are going to be. They could be really good, and those two picks will be in the 25s or 26s. And then it's not quite as good of a deal because that Charlotte pick has protections on it. The Hawks picks don't have protections on it. So that's, when you're looking at the picks, that's kind of what matters. And if you're just looking at picks for that. But the other thing to consider is how good are the Spurs next year? Right. I mean, as you wrote, Mike, it's a lot about Victor Wembanyama, and how do you perform and where do you get into the draft? If the Spurs win the lottery next year, then this is a slam dunk win because then you have Victor, and then you're way ahead of where you were, and the rebuilding starts much faster.
A long time ago, Tom Orsborn mentioned that Mike Finger actually did his job for once yesterday and wrote an elucidating column, kind of breaking down the Spurs reasoning. Why don't you go through that so our readers / listeners / viewers can sort of get the Spurs point of view on this?
I also want to point out, just for listeners of the podcast, our last two podcasts, the host of this thing, first of all, called out the first Spurs pick correctly. because the only member of the panel to do that. And then the last time was the only member of the panel to strenuously say that Dejounte Murray is going to be traded. So I'm just saying.
Well, I regret now giving him that compliment, man. It's gone straight to his head.
The blind squirrel has found a few nuts lately, is all I'm saying.
While taking credit, I'd like to say that they took the deal that I said was better. The deal was better to get Gallo and not take Collins, and that's the deal they took.
Some reporting on that. Can pass along that there were discussions among the Spurs brain trust, which included Greg Popovich, by the way. Greg Popovich did absolutely sign off on this deal and is, as far as everyone expects, and I think as far as Greg Popovich expects, he's going to be back and is on board with coaching this young team. He enjoyed the young team last year, maybe as much as any season that he's had in a long time. And I think he's going to be invigorated to do it again. But there were discussions among the Spurs leadership about whether the John Collins deal was an option, to take a player who has 5 years left on his deal, a player younger than Dejounte Murray, a power forward, a guy who could fit into a rebuilding effort, but who has a huge 5-year deal on the books. That was an option to take him, and less in terms of picks. The Spurs ultimately decided, rather than that, just take contract filler, which is what Danilo Gallinari is. It's just a contract to make the deal legal and maximize on those picks. And another thing that maybe gets lost among casual fans who don't realize that exactly how pick capital works. It's to the Spurs' benefit that they push those unprotected Hawks picks back to 2025 and 2027, and that swap back a couple of years. That's better than if they would have got the Hawks' first round pick next year, because next year they're going to have Dejounte Murray and Trae Young playing together, and you figure that pick, at least for that deal for at least a year, is going to make them a playoff team. There's a chance that this doesn't work in the long run, like many high-profile trades for all-stars don't work, and the whole thing could blow up. And this is the same thing with the Celtics had a pick swap with the Nets at one point, and they benefited from that. And it isn't hard to envision a scenario where in a couple of years those unprotected Hawks picks look much better than the picks that they could have gotten in 2023 or 2024, as well as that pick swap. The Spurs could be in a better situation victory wise. Is that pick swap's 2026? By then the Spurs can have a better record than the Hawks, and that swap might be huge.
An example of how that works, you mentioned this, the Celtics Nets from way back in the day. That was the deal that ended with Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett going to Brooklyn, right, and the Celtics just entering rebuilding mode. everyone thinking, well, not everyone, but the Nets thought they were going to be great. But by the time the pick swap came up, they were decidedly not great. The Celtics ended up with the Nets pick in whatever year that was. It ended up being third overall. The Boston Celtics selected a fellow called Jason Tatum with that pick. And if that's the reason, I mean, it's not outlandish to say that pick swap is the main reason the Boston Celtics were in the NBA Finals this season.
It's not outlandish at all. But to get into I guess that's part of the rationale for why this Spurs trade was the right thing to do. But to review what was in the newspaper, what I sort of tried to lay out was, again, going back to what a big deal Dejounte Murray's improvement was. Like Tom mentioned, he overcomes an injury, he overcomes all kinds of things to become a legitimate all-star. And even though he was an injury replacement as an all-star last year, I think most people agree that was more than merited, more than deserved, that he belonged there. Just had a huge year. But when you looked at what this overwhelming success story was going to do for the Spurs, you would think that, by the end of this deal, which was his current deal was a bargain by NBA standards, he might be able to lift him to the 6th or 7th seed, right? Like if he got help, if Keldon Johnson came along, if Devin Vassell came along, if some of these rookies slowly progressed. Like, I don't think there's any listener of this podcast, anybody out there, even the most ardent Spurs fans, who thought that by 2024, the Spurs were going to be championship contenders with Dejounte Murray as the head of the snake, as a term that Greg Popovich likes to use. And that's not crapping on Dejounte Murray. I mean, one of the best, what pick was he taking with 29? I mean, yes. He's in the top 0.5% of players ever taken with the 29th pick. Like, huge success story. But you have to kind of step back and think, well, what are we doing if we're keeping him around for 2 more years and that's the end game? And then in the summer of 2024, the Spurs have to offer him $200 million to stay. And in the meantime, you haven't given yourself a chance to maybe luck into Victor Wemby. And like that draft next year, supposedly the evaluators, the prospect watchers say it's more than a 1-person draft. I think there's a guy named Scoot who's supposed to be a really good number 2 pick.
There's a fella called Amen that would be the answer to their prayers.
There's a fella called Amen who could be the answer to their prayers.
Yeah. You agree?
When the Spurs, people talk about how the Spurs have been bottoming out and how miserable it's been. Well, the pick they just took, number 9 in the draft, that's the highest pick they've taken since Tim Duncan. There are 8 picks worse than that. There are 8 possibilities of having a season more miserable than that. And next season, let's be honest, it's not all sunflowers and roses here. Like, it's going to be hard next year. It's going to be hard for a fan base. It's going to be hard probably at times for Greg Popovich. It's going to be hard for beat writers to come up with angles during a season in which a team loses maybe 60 games, maybe 65 games, something along those lines. Like the San Antonio does not know the type of NBA misery that next season is likely to bring, but there's a plan involved here. And the plan is that when you take these picks that Atlanta was offering, and I think Dejounte Murray is only the 4th player in NBA history to be traded for 3 first-rounders. Like, it's James Harden and it's Anthony Davis and Paul George, maybe. Like, that's a rare, huge haul.
Finger that's right and also incorrect. Current NBA players, this is where you can start criticizing in draft capital and what draft capital means a little bit. The other player on that list that you missed is Usami Dang, who the Oklahoma City Thunder just gave up 3 picks to trade for. They weren't very good 1st-round picks, but they were because of the protections on them. But they gave up 3 picks to move up to number 11 and take Usami Dang. So sometimes those draft capitals don't mean as much if you have way too many of them, because you got to use them eventually.
Well, the point is that the picks better coincide with your Spurs window. And if you're going to build around something, and if Dejounte Murray's window, which was the next 2 years, wasn't going to get you into the championship, then it makes sense to kind of push it down the road. And I don't know. Again, reasonable people can disagree, but there was a reason to all this. There's a reason why they went with picks instead of John Collins. And that is what your Spurs were thinking.
Just to make Spurs fans, just to kind of chill them out a little bit, to give them a little solace. What I hear you saying is they just need to trust the process.
Yeah, that's not great either.
Well, just, you feel bad about the loss. It hurts again, but your team is going for broke. They're swinging for the fences. Pick the cliche you want and be grateful for that. I mean, they're trying to win another championship, trying to get a centerpiece player along the lines of a Duncan and Robinson. Not going to be that good, but the thinking is there. Get another marquee player, try to win a championship. You're not playing for, play-in spot, mediocrity. You're going for broke. And as a fan, I would think that would be exciting.
One way to frame it is there's a difference in the NBA between a star player and a superstar player, an all-star even, and an all-NBA player. And if you throw max money at the first group, that's a good way to kill any kind of rebuilding. You wrongly throw max money at the first group. That's a way to kill a rebuilding project. Like, you give that money to your all-NBA guys, your superstars, your franchise player. And there's really no other way to slice it, in that the Spurs did not evaluate Dejounte Murray as quite being that. Otherwise, they would have kept him. So a lot of the Spurs players that can't figure out this morning why the Spurs would trade a budding superstar at 25 years old, it's because the Spurs didn't evaluate him quite the same way that those fans did. And I don't really even mean that as a slight at Dejounte. It's just that based on the actions of the Spurs, that's the only conclusion you can draw.
And I don't even think I think you're absolutely right. And I don't even think, if fans are honest with themselves, that they, at any point during the past year or two, when Dejounte was making this meteoric rise, did any Spurs fans think of Dejounte Murray as being that type of superstar player? Like, no one thought that this was a Kawhi Leonard situation where, as long as you have this guy on your team, you're competing for championships.
Right.
Like, and that's not an insult to Dejounte Murray, by the way. Like, he's just, the Kawhi Leonards are rare.
There's only like 10 of those guys in the world.
Right. And so even though this is a big deal in San Antonio, and because of when it happened, right before free agency starts, it's a big deal around the league. This is not a Kawhi Leonard story. This is not. And by the way, that's sort of an argument that the Spurs did well here, because I think that when was that 4 years ago, when the Spurs were forced to sell Kawhi Leonard, like, they probably would have taken this deal for Kawhi Leonard back then. Even though that was a point when you still had LaMarcus Aldridge, you still had some veterans that made the Spurs feel like they needed to keep sort of being competitive. 3 first rounders and a draft spot would have been, or a draft swap would have been hard to turn down for Kawhi Leonard 3 years ago. And the Spurs got that package for a lesser player. And again, that sounds like a jab at Dejounte Murray. It's just most players in the league are lesser players compared to Kawhi Leonard. So I think Jeff's onto something there. If the Spurs believed that Murray was that type of just rare, once a generation type of player, this probably wouldn't have happened this week, but it did happen. And I guess we can now. We don't want to be here all day in this ad hoc bonus episode of the Spurs Insider, but we can look a little bit at details of what this means for the current team. And I think we could start with Murray's position. And this might be an opportunity for young Josh Primo to kind of, who I'm not sure we considered a pure point guard when he played his rookie year. But I think he's going to get the opportunity to show he can do that. He might play multiple positions, but he's going to get a chance to run the show, and that could be fun. It could be ugly at times, but should be entertaining.
Yeah, and the NBA has become, we've talked about this so much, where positions are almost meaningless, and the way a lot of teams run their offense, and when the Spurs have kind of run their offense, I mean, if you think about it, the ball is in a lot of people's, it doesn't really matter who you designate as the point guard all the time. The ball ends up in a lot of people's hands, running a lot of pick and roll kind of options on multiple times on the same possession. So I think what the Spurs have done, drafting all those wings all those years, is to have multiple people who can handle the ball at one time. So I think, I'm not saying they're set there, but I think that's something you'll see. I do think, if it's me, probably what I do in free agency is try to go out and get like a cheap veteran point guard, not to be your starter, just to have on the roster, just sort of, I'm always big on you. Even if you want to go full on youth movement, you've got to have some old people on the roster that have been in the NBA and know what it takes. So if I'm Brian Wright, that might be one of my focuses on in free agency, not going out and signing a star point guard, but just a steady kind of backup veteran guy. I mean, how great would it be to have Tyus Jones and Trey Jones on the same team? That would be kind of fun.
I know you were joking earlier about the trust the process line, but
yes,
from what I'm told, from what I gather, even though the Spurs will listen, that the intention is not to just tear everything down to the bottom, because that would, with the group they already have in place, that would make no sense, because so many of their players that are productive and that are already in place are guys who figure to be part of the next generation. I mean, you're Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, Josh Primo, the picks they just made, all those guys. You're not going to dump those guys off. Those guys have value. So, you're not going to go to the bottom of the barrel. And I'm not sure that it's a slam dunk guarantee that Jakob Poeltl is traded, even though I think that's a possibility. That when the Sixers did the process and just made their team as bad as it could possibly be for an extended amount of time, that was ugly. And I don't think it's going to get quite that ugly for the Spurs, just because the goal here is to not make this last beyond the next year or two. And I think that there's already, like, the players that I mentioned are already in place that should give you something to be excited about. They're going to win some games when Keldon Johnson has a big game, when Devin Vassell has a big game, when Josh Primo has a big game. Like, those guys have talent. But sure, if the question is Jakob Poeltl going to be back, I'm not sure about that. He could be had for picks. And by the way, the Spurs have all the salary cap room. A lot of that can be used not necessarily to go out and get DeAndre Ayton or Zach LaVine or whoever the big free agent is. You can get more picks by taking other teams' bad contracts, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen this year.
I don't expect to see them blow all that cap space on free agents this summer, but I do think there's a path to where next summer is going to be a better class. If you still have that sort of space, you can go out and sign 3 starter level players, maybe not superstars next summer, because I don't think the Spurs rebuilding project is their plan is built on signing superstars and free agents. That would be a fool's errand. So I think you can go get maybe 3 starter level players, split that money between those next summer. You've got your young core in place. Like we've talked about, the 3 draft picks they've already made this year. You've got 2 more next year. And I think that's kind of where you're going to see sort of the foundation of whatever the next Spurs team is going to become between that group of people. To answer your question from a minute ago, who plays point guard? You did mention Josh Primo, and I don't know if he ends up being the starting point guard or how you want to designate those things. But this is going to be a big summer for him. Like, it was already going to be a big summer for him. When we talked to him yesterday at summer league practice, we were talking about what a big summer it's going to be in his second year. And that was before the trade came down. We had left the building when that had happened. So now that Dejounte is gone, this is a huge summer for Josh Primo, and you want to see some big strides from him. So that would be my sort of teaser for following summer league and summer league coverage. Is Josh Primo's job just became much more important than maybe it would have been, and it was already going to be pretty important.
And before we go, Jeff, you were the first to report the answer to the question that we had on the last podcast. This seems like ages ago, but it was before the Dejounte Murray trade happened. You had confirmed that the Spurs did extend the qualifying offer to Lonnie Walker to make him a restricted free agent. Like everything else in the NBA when it comes to offseason coverage, that requires explanations. And why don't you, for the listeners, go into the nuances, the details of what that means for him, for the Spurs, and for that relationship?
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that Lonnie Walker is coming back to the Spurs. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're super pumped about, super optimistic about getting him back. It's more like that $6.3 million qualifying offer. The way I always think about it is it's kind of like an ante, except it's an ante you can get back, but it's kind of the price of admission to make him restricted. And what Lonnie Walker can do is he can say, okay, I'll take that 1 year, $6.3 million qualifying offer. I'll accept that. And then I become an unrestricted free agent next year. I'm told pretty adamantly that is not going to happen. Lonnie at this point, has no intention of accepting the qualifying offer. So all it does is it allows the Spurs to match any outside offers he might get once free agency opens at 5:00 Thursday afternoon. Also, it can be rescinded anytime, that offer. Like if the Spurs decide they don't want to tie up that cap space and they need it to sign someone else, they can just rescind it and let Lonnie be unrestricted immediately. Basically, it would have meant more if they didn't extend the qualifying offer yesterday, because Lonnie Walker would have been an unrestricted free agent immediately. And that would tell you they just have zero. It would have told me, at least, the Spurs have zero interest in bringing him back at almost any price. The fact that they gave it to him kind of keeps his skin in the game a little bit. It also keeps him a little bit under the Spurs' control. It's easier. It just gives them options. Like everything the Spurs do and most smart front offices do, it's about options. The Spurs still have a little bit of control over his situation. If they need him for some hypothetical sign and trade, he's there for that. It's probably the same reason, just to, they'll probably hold on. Like, I think I read today that Gallinari's guarantee date is going to be July 8th. Like, they'll probably hold on to him all the way to July 8th in case they need to use that contract for some reason to trade. So I wouldn't read a lot into the Spurs offering Lonnie that qualifying offer. I think what we said on the last pod is probably still accurate. He's more likely to play somewhere else next year than play for the Spurs, but the door isn't closed all the way yet.
And you're probably not going to see Danilo wearing a Spurs jersey either.
I don't think we're looking at that. No. Again, it was just contract filler. And again, it's kind of everything's happening in real time. But I think I just read that Danilo and his people have agreed to push his contract is what, 26 million, Gallinari's?
21 maybe.
21.
But the guarantee needed to be 11 to make the trade legal.
So if you waive him now by July 8th, you only have to pay him 11. If he's still on the roster, $10 million. If he's still on the roster after July 8th, you have to pay him the whole thing. Right. So I would expect, if the Spurs can't move him, don't need him, can't move him, don't want to flip him, can't flip him in the opening days of free agency, you'll see him just waived by that July 8th date.
Well, July got probably less interesting for the Spurs because I can't see them being huge players in the free agent market coming up. The next season got maybe less compelling when it comes to winning games, maybe more compelling when it comes to just watching young guys play. And maybe that's the way you look at it. We'll have plenty of time to prepare for that in the coming weeks and months. And in the meantime, all I'd do is ask you to take care of each other and keep it real. We'll see you.